Barry, I'd like to welcome you back, sir, to the fourth part of this interview. And
thank you very much
indeed for coming back. Why are they not doing this? I mean, what do they need to do, and why are they not getting it done?
Well, I think here's the punchline. The fact that you're using the word leadership already confuses every leader. I think the real word is fellowship, which is obviously a very new concept, which is if my customers or my employees or my suppliers are going to tell me how to walk down the street, going to tell me where to go and how to go there as a crowd with power of wisdom, then what most leaders think, hey, I'm going to give up all control to these crazy people, these customers, these employees. I'm the leader. I spent 30 years getting to this role. Why the heck would I give up like this control to them, right? And the reality is, that's hard for leaders. They think they were put there to do something that is different than today's reality, which is millennials don't want to be led. They want to be given a choice about where to go and how to go there. They don't want to be told what to do and how to go.
So is that an employee leadership perspective, or are you talking about leading the stakeholders and your community, or is it applying to both?
Well, it's obviously applying to both. I'm not sure how you would even lead a group of people like Facebook's customer base. How would you lead 1.6 billion people? What would you say to them?
Yeah,
I want all of you to go on at 9 o'clock this morning. I want you to basically punch in, enter all the data I asked you for, and then at the end of 5 o'clock, 8 hours of work, I want you to punch out. And by the way, if I'm Apple, I want you to give me your fingerprint. Now, can you imagine if the FBI or CIA said that exactly to me? Now, Facebook and Apple have done that. The CIA and FBI said, Barry, I want you to give me your fingerprint, which is what I do on my Apple phone every day. I want you to give me all the information regarding your friends and family. I want you to tell me where I can find them during the middle of the day. I want you to let me observe them, just to give you the number, 1,800 times a day, which is how often my phone observes me.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell me everything you know about everybody in your network. Do you think I'd say yes to the FBI and CIA? Or is MI6 still here? I watch the show. MI6 and MI5, they're still here?
Yeah.
And they're still debating like the FBI and CIA over control? Fantastic. You think I'd give it to the MI5 or MI6? Maybe if James Bond was there, I guess. I would.
That's right. But a lot of the stuff you've talked about in the book so far, you talked about building trust, and that's just not just with employees, but that's with the whole stakeholder community. But how, for example, is that mindset from commercial to trust, where you build the trust and the commerce comes? How can that be actually done when, for example, to build trust, you have to have a great experience, right? You have to have a great experience with the brand. But if in organizations, for example, people bombard you with email, or they just put up the ads, et cetera, how can you actually get that shift in the mindset?
See, it's really important, right? No joke, right, about the fact that we have really turned over all that data to Apple and to Facebook and to Amazon. We all have, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Fingerprints, I mean, gosh, they have more fingerprints than the United States government of Great Britain does.
Yeah.
But they created so much trust in us that they would not use it for purposes that were not intended, that we do not want it to use. And they can violate that trust in a minute, and all of us will leave those organizations because we've given so much to them in our trust. Their brands are so trustworthy, at least for the moment, that we will do what we think is in our own best interest. Companies, other than these very few leaders, haven't yet realized that yet. That the brands in today's network world are about giving us what we want the way we want it, right? Yeah. And letting us do anything we want with it. And a good example, my Apple phone probably looks nothing like your Apple phone. Yeah. Now, I spend a lot more on my Mercedes-Benz sports car than my Apple phone. But you know something, Mercedes-Benz does not let me put my own brand plate on it. It doesn't say car by Barry Liebert. Or it doesn't allow me to paint it any color I want and put anything I want on the outside and have it any way I want. Where Apple will let me do that. I can completely modify my Apple phone today. Yeah. I can even crack the code. Yeah. I don't think Mercedes-Benz is going to let me do that. No. But if Mercedes-Benz did, imagine the trust. I might have loyalty to Mercedes-Benz. Realize I paid the tens of thousands of dollars for the car. Right. Therefore, it's my car, not yours anymore.
Yeah. So it's about, again, empowering the customers, valuing them, loving them, building that relationship over time, and that's how you ultimately win.
Yes.
But how do you expect a CEO who's been trained in 1985, MBA in 1970 or whatever, and he or she has been doing very, very well on sort of making money the good old way, to actually, what can they do about changing this mindset?
Well, I think the really good question is, who do they need to turn to
Yeah.
to begin to understand this new way of leading,
Yeah.
which I'm going to keep calling following, right? Which
Yeah.
is fellowship.
Yeah.
I think they have to turn to people like who basically are filming us today,
Yeah.
young men and women who know this is the way of the world,
Yeah.
and not just embrace them as young technologists, right? Which is an interesting thesis, but they don't understand the value they bring,
Yeah.
which is how to talk and speak and be in the language, the way of being that millennials are in.
Yeah.
And so until they embrace them as something that's valuable, not just
Yeah.
as technologists, but as business model experts. These are business model changes. These are mental model changes. We can't expect them to do it. We can imagine the head of any one of these major car companies asking the following question. How do I build a relationship with you before you buy a car?
Right.
No one's ever asked me that question.
No.
And if you don't buy a car, how do I keep a relationship with you?
Yeah.
So that when you do buy a car, I have a relationship with you. Same thing with this interview. How we might, well, I'm sure we'll do this interview again. How might we build relationships with the viewers, audience today, next time, where they're asking the questions first,
Yeah.
then ask questions while we're here, and maintain a relationship with me after I leave.
Yeah.
All on behalf of you having set up that relationship for us.
That's right. That's right. So you came when you came in. You said we should ask the camera guy some questions, and let's do that.
Fantastic
let's do
idea.
it. Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. Fantastic.
Let's talk about platforms. You know, that's the biggest thing for me, is that a leader is all well and good if you're there and you show me how to navigate through this platform. I would much prefer a leader to show me the platforms that are available to me. Do you think that's the way that all leaders should go about, is providing options for the people that are following, as opposed to just saying that this is the direct way we should go?
First, I happen to love the fact that we're becoming like Jimmy Kimmel Live. Great job by that one. The answer is yes, because increasingly there was an old expression, let a man or a woman fish for himself, not fish for them, right? Yeah. So my view is we're moving from the service economy to the self-service economy, and we're moving there for good reason, not to shift costs, but because I don't believe anymore anybody's going to serve me. I do believe I know how to serve myself. And this is really important in the healthcare industry. You guys are having a big debate right now here about platforms for young doctors. I'm not sure what that's called, junior doctors.
Junior doctors, yeah.
Junior doctors, which is interesting. We're regulating how doctors and when doctors should work here in Great Britain, which is an interesting thesis that, doctors should be regulated that way. You wouldn't want to be regulated when you can do an interview, when you can't do an interview as a junior interviewer, right?
Right.
So the concept of having platforms where people can interact on their terms, literally, a junior doctor with anybody, is a great idea. Maybe they can interact online rather than interacting on in person. Maybe they don't want to interact in person, and maybe the patient doesn't want to see the doctor. All he or she wants, which is research says this, is access. They don't want assets. They want access to the information. So maybe the healthcare industry has the platform concept wrong, meaning it has to be in the physical place.
Got you. I love it. Does that answer your question? It definitely answers the question. Ross, have you got anything you want to ask?
I went to a talk the other day with London Futurists, so it's generally a platform for pioneers in tech and other areas. And David Wood was speaking. So he was part of Symbian, which was the operating platform for BlackBerry. And at the time, they were sort of ahead of the curve, and they were the sort of smartphone 1.0, and he was set to be a millionaire, basically. And they were looking out for all the major trends and thought they were really ahead of the curve. And then, the Apple iPhone came along and it just completely blew BlackBerry and Symbian out of the water. Now, when you look at something like Google, a company like Google, which is naturally right up there as sort of the major trendsetter, and they've got the Google car, which everyone sees as the next step in the evolution of tech, or at least transport. But then, the taxi drone comes along from the side, which is, it's one of those things where, you're on the wave, but, who needs a Google self-driving car when you've got a taxi drone who's just going to pick you up and fly you to where you need to go? So even a company like Google might completely miss that trend. So how does a good leader how do you keep up with the trends today? I mean, because things change so quickly.
Great question, right? So think about the history of that one, right? Yeah. Which is, the wireline carriers really believed in copper wire. They did. They really believed in what's called the last mile. Yeah. And I always say, gee, even Paul Revere couldn't get that one with 1 by sea, 2 by air, 3 by something, who knows what, right? Which is by air, right? Which is mobile. The great carriers, great telephone companies didn't understand this, that we were going to ultimately do it by air. And your question is fantastic, which is, How do we know, which I'd prefer rather than Uber, I'd prefer Uber Air, right? Which is that some drone would pick me up from this office and take me to the next office. I really don't want to get in even an Uber car because I'd rather get airlifted on an Uber, my own personal drone. I think today, when technology changes every 18 months, which is basically the duration of a CEO, CEOs have to place their bets meticulously. That's why capital allocation is so important, to understand that technology is moving so fast that you have to be extremely agile, which is why the gig economy is so valuable. It's like why the Broadway business model is right. You want to bring teams in and teams out, because otherwise teams become complacent and they'll miss the fact that maybe next year I'm back here, I'll have a drone car, right? It'll pick me up, move me around, and I don't have to worry about traffic.
Yeah. Is it the CEO's job or the leadership team or everybody's job to do the innovation? In your world, it's the network. But you don't want to rely on the network for ideas and innovations and breakthroughs, right?
You want everybody, and here's my view. The best ideas come from the young millennials, right? Because they're really living this stuff. I mean, honest to gosh. In my organization, we're small. In my organization, we have a bunch of consultants like myself from McKinsey and Bain who had a perspective. Along comes my CTO, who's even younger, 28 years old, and he says, I think that's a very long way of doing anything. Let's bring in a bunch of computer scientists, machine learning. I go, what the heck is that? With algorithms. And let's turn everything you've been doing from pivot tables and Excel into machine learning language in the cloud.
Yeah.
I said, what the heck is that? Sounds cool to me. I know what the cloud looks like. I have no idea what machine learning language. The machines are learning 24/7 just as we're sitting here. A lot faster, better, cheaper. And none of my companies have any of those skill sets other than Google.
And to augment this, because I think this is a brilliant point that you're making here, in the future we should do the leaders in interviews. I'm not coming up the questions, I'm just orchestrating the questions that have come from the network.
Correct, because what you're really trying to do is to empower your followers to become followers of other people. You're acting as a third-party fiduciary, good fiduciary. So you let people talk to me. You let people talk to your camera, and these guys are experts, right? You saw their questions. They're fantastic. You want them to interact with them, literally, just like Jimmy Kimmel does, right? Let the fans interact with the fans, right? And you want to be able to have them ask questions. If they're spirited questions, that's fantastic, because that's how you get spirited answers and spirited engagement.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Millennials, if we can just talk about the millennials for a second. You know, you say
Why are you asking me? We should start with those guys again.
Yeah, that's a good question. What do millennials want in a workplace?
Essentially we don't want the behemoth, which is this bureaucratic machine which seems to run the world. Companies are getting larger and larger. They're essentially a couple of companies, holding companies, corporations, which own everything. And we're in these bloated organizations where management is almost non-existent, or the bureaucracy is so great that there is no major disruption other than a few pioneering companies. So how do millennials sort of break away from the system that exists that clearly is outdated?
So I adore that question, right? It seems to me that we are creating plutocratic organizations and billionaires at a rate we've never seen before. Because what the digital world did is something that globalization never imagined. Globalization, like Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, was the concept that we would see across flat worlds and connect. But he was thinking when he did that a decade ago, that the world was flat physically. When Mark Andreessen, a very famous venture capitalist in the United States, wrote an article in 2011 which said software is going to eat the world, he wasn't even imagining that networks would come on top of software. He was thinking the internet would enable the flatness of the world. When the digital world emerged, it jumped over, like the question he had, which is so wonderful, about drone cars. It jumped over the flattening of the world and connected all of us in a nanosecond. Right? And it's happening ever faster. So I think what you're going to see is, although I don't believe in these bureaucratic organizations as a serial entrepreneur, if we don't really begin to appreciate the power of the network, the organizations that have become really powerful become plutocratic. They'll be so big and so powerful, bigger than countries, bigger than states, bigger than anything that we've ever seen, bigger than continents, because they will appreciate the power of the network. And they will rule, like you said, there'll be 3 or 4 major companies that basically provide everything to the customer, everything behind them, just supply chain. So I think it's incumbent upon the customer to do something we've not talked about. The customer has to remember they're the manufacturer. I manufacture my data for Facebook. I manufacture my data for Google. This is happening in the European Union. I manufacture those relationships. I put up that content. In time, I'm hoping, begging, pleading that we ultimately take it back.
Barry, I've got about another 1,526 things I want to ask you. These camera guys, I'm sure now they know they can ask questions, do as well. But I know you've got an interview with a CEO, the other side of town with a FTSE 100 company, so we better let you go. Barry, but on behalf of everybody watching and for the great content you shared over the last 4 interviews, I just want to say a massive thank you.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.